Welcome to Touching Animal Stories. The rain fell in relentless sheets the night the world changed for Lila Chen. 10 years old, curled up in the back seat of the car with her favorite book, she had no idea that the simple drive home from her piano lesson would become the dividing line between before and after. The headlights of the oncoming truck, the screech of tires, the sickening lurch as her father swerved off the road and into the ravine below. These fragments would haunt her dreams for months to come. The car had plunged into Willow Creek, the river that wound through their small town like a silver ribbon, and though Lila was pulled from the wreckage unconscious but alive, her father wasn't so fortunate. When Lila woke in the hospital 3 days later, she remembered nothing. Not the accident, not her father's face in those final moments, not even her own name. The doctors called it dissociative amnesia, a psychological defense mechanism against trauma. Her mother, May, sat by her bedside with red-rimmed eyes, introducing herself over and over again to her daughter, who looked at her with the confusion of a stranger. 6 months later, Lila still jumped at loud noises, still woke screaming from nightmares she couldn't recall, and still refused to go near water of any kind. The mere sight of a glass filled with liquid could send her into a panic attack. Her mother had tried everything: therapy, support groups, even moving to a new house farther from the river. But nothing seemed to reach the frightened girl who had replaced their vibrant, curious daughter. It was during one particularly difficult session with Dr. Evans, their trauma specialist, that the idea emerged. "Lila, have you ever considered a therapy animal?" Dr. Evans asked gently, watching as Lila nervously twisted the hem of her shirt. Sometimes connecting with an animal can help where human connections feel too overwhelming. Lila shook her head without looking up. "I don't like dogs. They're loud." "Not all dogs, Doctor," Evans countered. "Some are trained specifically to help children who've experienced trauma. They're calm, gentle, and can sense when you're feeling anxious before you even realize it yourself." Lila remained silent, but the seed had been planted. 2 weeks later, Maichen stood with her daughter at the local animal shelter, both of them hesitant. Lila clung to her mother's hand, her eyes scanning the kennels with apprehension. The barking was overwhelming, the smells unfamiliar and unpleasant. She was ready to turn around and leave when something caught her attention. In the far corner of the shelter, away from the more energetic dogs vying for attention, sat a golden retriever. He wasn't jumping or barking like the others. Instead, he watched the visitors with calm, intelligent eyes. When Lila's gaze met his, he didn't lunge forward excitedly but simply tilted his head, as if studying her. There was something in his expression, understanding perhaps, that made Lila take a hesitant step forward. "That's Bailey," the shelter volunteer said, following their gaze. "He came to us about 6 months ago. Some family couldn't keep him anymore. He's been through our therapy dog training program and is ready for his forever home, but he's a bit selective." "Selective?" May asked. The volunteer nodded. "He's turned down several potential families. Seems to know who he's meant to be with. Would you like to meet him?" Lila surprised herself by nodding. The volunteer opened the kennel and Bailey emerged slowly, his movements deliberate and unhurried. He approached Lila cautiously, sniffing the air before gently resting his chin on her knee. Lila froze, but when she didn't pull away, Bailey looked up at her with warm brown eyes that seemed to say, "I know, I'm here." Without thinking, Lila reached out and touched his soft fur. A strange calm settled over her, the first she'd felt in months. For the first time since the accident, she didn't feel the familiar tightening in her chest. "Can we take him home?" Lila whispered, the first complete sentence she'd spoken in weeks. Bailey became a constant presence in Lila's life from that moment on. He slept at the foot of her bed, accompanied her to school, with special permission from the principal, and sat patiently beside her during her therapy sessions. He seemed to understand her unspoken fears, positioning himself between her and potential triggers, alerting her mother when Lila's breathing became too rapid, a sign of an impending panic attack. What neither Lila nor her mother realized was that Bailey was helping in ways they couldn't yet understand. His presence was slowly rebuilding bridges in Lila's traumatized brain, creating new neural pathways where old ones had been damaged by grief and fear. One afternoon, about 3 months after Bailey joined their family, something remarkable happened. Lila was sitting by the window watching rain fall into a puddle in their backyard when a memory surfaced, vague but distinct. She saw her father's hands, strong and capable, teaching her to skip stones on the surface of Willow Creek. The memory was accompanied by a feeling of safety, of being protected. Lila gasped, clutching Bailey's fur as the memory faded as quickly as it had come. "I remembered something, Mom," she said, her voice trembling. "About Dad and the river." May rushed to her daughter's side, tears in her eyes. "What was it, sweetheart?" Lila shook her head, frustrated. "I don't know. It was just hands, his hands, on the water." Bailey licked her hand as if to say, "It's okay, more will come." And more did come. Small fragments at first, like pieces of a puzzle slowly being assembled. A memory of her father's laugh as they built a sandcastle at the riverbank. The smell of his cologne mixed with the scent of river water. The sound of his voice reading to her from a book about marine life. Each memory was accompanied by a physical reaction, sometimes a headache, sometimes nausea. But Lila began to welcome these moments. They were proof that she hadn't lost everything, that parts of her father still lived inside her. The breakthrough came on a sweltering July afternoon. Lila and Bailey were sitting beneath the old oak tree in their backyard when another memory surfaced with startling clarity. This one wasn't just a fragment, it was a complete scene. She was in the boat with her father. The sun was high in the sky, reflecting off the water in dazzling patterns. Her father was taking water samples from different parts of the river, explaining to her why clean water mattered. "See this, Lila? This is how we protect our home," he had said, holding up a clear vial filled with river water. "Some people don't care about keeping the river clean, but we do." Then she remembered the argument, the heated conversation her father had on his cell phone. "I know what I saw, Robert. The discharge is toxic. People could get sick." A pause. "No, I won't keep quiet about this. The evidence is clear." Lila sat bolt upright, her heart pounding. Bailey immediately pressed against her side, grounding her with his familiar warmth. "Mom," she called out, her voice shaking with urgency. "I remember something important." May came running, concern etched on her face. "What is it, honey?" "It wasn't an accident," Lila said, the realization dawning on her. "Dad was investigating something at the river. He was arguing with someone named Robert about toxic waste. He said the evidence was clear." May's face went pale. "Robert Henderson. He owns Henderson Manufacturing. Your father was looking into reports that they were illegally dumping chemicals into Willow Creek." Lila felt a surge of anger mixed with grief. That's why he was out on the river that day. He was collecting evidence. May knelt beside her daughter, tears streaming down her face. "Your father was an environmental engineer, Lila. He cared deeply about protecting our community. I didn't tell you before because I didn't want to add to your pain, but he had been investigating Henderson Manufacturing for months." Bailey whined softly, resting his head on Lila's knee as if to say, "We'll find the truth." The next morning, Lila and her mother visited the small office that had once belonged to Lila's father. It had remained untouched since his death, a shrine to the life that had been so abruptly cut short. As Lila stepped inside, Bailey at her heels, she was overwhelmed by the scent of her father's aftershave still lingering in the air. The room was filled with books on environmental science, maps of the river system, and stacks of reports. Lila ran her fingers over the surface of his desk, feeling the familiar grooves and scratches that marked years of work. "Where do we start?" Lila asked, looking at the overwhelming amount of material. May sighed. "Your father kept meticulous records, but after the accident, I couldn't bring myself to go through everything." Bailey suddenly perked up, his ears alert. He walked to a bookshelf in the corner and began scratching at the base. Lila followed him, crouching down to investigate. Behind a row of textbooks, she found a small, almost invisible compartment. Inside was a waterproof case containing a USB drive and a notebook. Lila's hands trembled as she opened the notebook. Her father's familiar handwriting filled the pages. Water quality readings, dates, locations, and increasingly concerned notes about unusual chemical levels and possible illegal discharge. "He was right," Lila whispered. "He found evidence." May took the notebook with shaking hands. "We need to take this to the authorities." But when they contacted the local police, they were met with surprising resistance. Officer Jenkins, who had handled her father's case, seemed unusually dismissive. "Accidents happen, Mrs. Chen," he said, avoiding eye contact. "Your husband was an experienced boater. Sometimes the river is just unpredictable." Lila felt a surge of anger. "It wasn't an accident. My father was investigating Henderson Manufacturing. He had evidence." Jenkins shifted uncomfortably. "Without concrete proof, there's not much we can do. And a child's memory?" "It's not just a memory," Lila interrupted. "We have his notes and a USB drive with evidence." Jenkins' expression hardened slightly. "I'll take a look at what you have, but I wouldn't get your hopes up." As they left the station, Lila knew something was wrong. Jenkins hadn't even examined the evidence they'd brought. He'd barely glanced at it before dismissing their concerns. That night, as Lila lay in bed, she made a decision. If the police wouldn't help, she would find the truth herself. She whispered her plan to Bailey, who listened intently, his eyes reflecting the moonlight filtering through the window. "We're going to figure this out, boy. Dad would want us to." The next day, Lila and her mother visited the Willow Creek Environmental Center, a small nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting the local river ecosystem. There they met Dr. Eris Thorne, a retired hydrologist who had worked with Lila's father. When Dr. Thorne saw the notebook, his expression turned grave. "Your father was onto something significant," he said, flipping through the pages. "These readings showed dangerously high levels of polychlorinated biphenyls, PCBs. They're banned for a reason. Long-term exposure can cause serious health problems." "Can you help us prove what happened to my father?" Lila asked. Dr. Thorne nodded. "I can analyze the data on the USB drive and compare it with current readings, but we'll need more evidence to build a case." Lila's heart sank. "We don't have anything else." Bailey, who had been lying quietly at Lila's feet, suddenly stood up and walked to the door, looking back at her expectantly. "Bailey thinks we're missing something," Lila said, a spark of hope igniting within her. Dr. Thorne smiled. "Animals often know more than we give them credit for. Why don't you take him for a walk along the river? Sometimes the answers we seek are right in front of us." The path along Willow Creek was familiar to Lila, though she hadn't walked it since before the accident. With each step, fragments of memory surfaced, her father pointing out different types of fish, teaching her how to identify healthy river plants, explaining the importance of clean water for the entire ecosystem. Bailey walked beside her, his nose to the ground, occasionally stopping to investigate something Lila couldn't see. They reached a bend in the river where her father had often collected samples. Bailey suddenly veered off the path, heading toward a thicket of bushes. "Bailey, wait!" Lila called, following him. The dog was digging at the base of an old willow tree. Lila knelt beside him, pushing aside the undergrowth. There, partially buried in the soil, was a small metal container, another waterproof case identical to the one they'd found in her father's office. Inside was a dated water sample labeled Henderson Manufacturing Outflow, June 15th, along with a note in her father's handwriting. "Definitive evidence. Contact EPA immediately." Lila's hands shook as she held the vial. This was it. The concrete proof they needed. "We did it, Bailey," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Dad left us a trail to follow." Bailey licked her hand, his tail wagging slowly but steadily, as if to say, "I told you we'd find it." With the new evidence in hand, Dr. Thorne contacted the Environmental Protection Agency. Within days, federal investigators arrived in town, armed with search warrants for Henderson Manufacturing. Lila watched from the courtroom gallery as the evidence was presented. The water samples, the notebook, the USB drive containing photographs of illegal discharge pipes all pointed to Henderson Manufacturing's systematic dumping of toxic chemicals into Willow Creek. Robert Henderson took the stand, his expensive suit and confident demeanor unable to mask the nervous tic in his left eye. When questioned about Lila's father, he claimed to have had professional disagreements, but denied any involvement in the accident. Then Dr. Thorne presented the final piece of evidence, the water sample Lila and Bailey had found. Chemical analysis confirmed it contained levels of PCBs 300 times higher than legally permitted. As the judge read the verdict, guilty of illegal dumping, falsifying environmental reports, and involuntary manslaughter, Lila felt a complex mix of emotions. Justice had been served, but it couldn't bring her father back. After the trial, as they left the courthouse, Lila felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Officer Jenkins, his expression filled with regret. "I'm sorry I didn't believe you," he said quietly. "Your father was a good man. I should have done more to protect him." Lila nodded, understanding that some people are trapped by their own fears and loyalties. "It's okay," she said. "You're doing the right thing now." The months that followed brought a new kind of healing. With Henderson Manufacturing under federal supervision and undergoing significant changes to their waste management practices, the water quality in Willow Creek began to improve. Fish returned to sections of the river that had been barren for years. Community cleanup efforts sprang up along the riverbanks. Lila continued her therapy, but the panic attacks became less frequent. She even began taking swimming lessons at the community center, Bailey always nearby in case she needed reassurance. The first time she submerged her head underwater, she didn't think of the accident. She thought of her father teaching her to blow bubbles in the river. One crisp autumn morning, Lila and her mother returned to the bend in the river where her father had collected samples. They scattered his ashes into the water, watching as the current carried them downstream. "I think he'd be proud of you, Lila," May said, her arm around her daughter's shoulders. Lila nodded, looking down at Bailey, who sat patiently beside her. "We did it together, Dad," she whispered. "You left us a trail to follow, and we found the truth." Bailey nudged her hand with his nose as if to say, "Always." At school, Lila started the River Guardians Club, a group of students dedicated to monitoring and protecting Willow Creek. They collected water samples, organized cleanup days, and educated younger students about environmental stewardship. During one of their first meetings, a new student named Marcus joined the club. He was quiet and kept to himself, much like Lila had been after her accident. "Hi, I'm Lila," she said, approaching him. "Want to learn how to test water quality?" Marcus nodded hesitantly. I don't know much about rivers." "That's okay," Lila said, smiling. "My dog Bailey will show you the ropes." As Bailey greeted Marcus with a friendly nudge, Lila realized how far she'd come. The girl who couldn't even look at a glass of water without panicking was now leading others in protecting the river her father had loved. 1 year after Henderson's conviction, the town dedicated a new section of Riverside Park in Lila's father's honor. David Chen, Memorial River Education Center, read the plaque, surrounded by native plants and featuring interactive displays about watershed protection. At the dedication ceremony, Lila was asked to speak. Standing at the podium, Bailey at her side, she looked out at the crowd of community members, friends, and family. "My father believed that clean water is a right, not a privilege," she began, her voice steady. "He taught me that one person can make a difference, even when facing powerful forces. When I lost him, I felt lost myself, afraid of the water he loved so much." She paused, placing a hand on Bailey's head. "But then I met Bailey. He didn't try to fix me or tell me everything would be okay. He just stayed by my side, reminding me that I wasn't alone. Animals have a way of understanding us when words fail." Lila took a deep breath. "Finding the truth about what happened to my father was painful, but it was also healing. It showed me that his work mattered, that his voice still echoes in this river and in all of us who continue his mission." She looked down at Bailey, who gazed back with unwavering loyalty. My father left me more than memories. He left me purpose. And with Bailey by my side, I know I'll never lose my way. As the crowd applauded, Lila felt a sense of peace she hadn't known since before the accident. The river flowed steadily beside them, carrying not just water, but hope for the future. That evening, as the sun set over Willow Creek, Lila sat on the banks with Bailey. She dipped her fingers into the cool water, watching the ripples spread outward. Remember when I couldn't even look at water without being scared? She asked Bailey, who rested his head on her lap. Bailey let out a soft huff, as if to say, I remember, but look at you now. Lila smiled, scratching behind his ears. You saved me, you know. Not just by helping me find the truth, but by teaching me how to live again. Bailey's tail thumped against the ground, a steady rhythm that matched the gentle flow of the river. As darkness fell, Lila lay back on the grass, Bailey curling up beside her. The stars reflected in the water, creating the illusion of swimming through the cosmos. I think Dad would be proud of us, she whispered. Bailey rested his chin on her chest, his warm breath steady against her skin. In that moment, surrounded by the sounds of the river and the presence of her faithful companion, Lila felt whole again. The river had taken much from her, but it had also given back. Truth, purpose, and the unexpected gift of a golden retriever who understood her silence better than anyone. As she drifted off to sleep under the starlit sky, Lila knew she would always carry her father's legacy in her heart, and that Bailey would always be there to remind her of her strength when she needed it most. The river flowed on, carrying with it not just water, but the echoes of the past and the promise of a cleaner future. A testament to what one determined girl, her loyal dog, and a community willing to listen could accomplish together.